Hello, you're watching news from Kazakhstan. It is Wednesday, September 26, and I'm Nurbek Savitakhunov. Several people, including a woman with child, were arrested near the capital city administration building for a public campaign. They came to Mayor Imangalit Tasmagambetov with a request not to evict them from the dormitory on the city outskirts. The building is subject to exemption for public use due to the construction of the third heating station. Residents have nowhere to go. Reaction from the mayor's office in the next report.
Black and white photographs of children. The inscription on the poster says, "Tasmagambetov, do not leave us." They live in a small family dormitory in Astana. Their parents demand not to demolish the building, or at least to provide them a decent compensation. The local administration currently offers a ridiculous amount of $1,000 per square meter, say the residents, while many of them live in 13 square meter rooms. People are outraged, as it is simply impossible to buy any kind of housing for the total amount of the compensation. Many of the dormitory residents fit 5 and 6 people in one room. Our government does not care for us. Instead of helping us, they are mocking us. Who shall we address this to? We appeal to the MPs. They kicked us out. The city administration ignores us. We cannot manage to pay a visit to Khoroshun. This is out of line. The first one to talk to the people gathered outside was the Prosecutor General's office official. He claimed that the action is unauthorized and issued a prescription. Later, he was replaced by a representative of the city administration, Miraz Shekenov, who informed them that the eviction is within the law and will still be completed. If they agree, we will find and buy off the housing on the real estate market, or we will compensate them. Otherwise, we will bring this to the court and let it decide what would be the amount of compensation. While the media was focused on the civil servant, the real drama unfolded just a few meters away. People in uniforms were putting the most active and noisy rally participants on the bus. A woman managed to break through the cordon and tried to run towards the reporters, but has been immediately intercepted by the police. We are holding a peaceful rally. We just want our housing. We want the governor and the president to know that we are about to become homeless. The female resident of the dormitory is taken away. Even the fact that she has a baby did not stop the police. Later she will be taken to her mother and they will sit in the interdistrict court until late in the evening. The resident of Astana and 7 of her neighbors are charged with administrative violation and are subjected to pay the fine.
Former Atyrau City Mayor Askar Kerimov was detained, confirmed the regional court press service on Tuesday. The official is placed under 72-hour arrest while his arrest warrant is being issued.
Askar Kerimov was an acting deputy governor of Atyrau region from August 2011 till February 2012, when Bergeris Kaliyev was a governor. Last week, he transferred power to Serik Aydarbekov. When the 32-year-old official left the office, he was called by the financial police a number of times for questioning about embezzlement of the funds from the state budget. Local paper Akjaik has previously reported about the issue. They are simply detained. After 72 hours, he will be brought to us on Thursday and we will issue the sanction. I'm not aware of who detained him. Maybe it was the financial police.
Former mayor of Zhanaozian Orak Sarbapeyev was sentenced to 10 years in maximum security prison with confiscation of property on Tuesday. The second trial in October, chaired by Judge Shapagat Al-Niyas, was initiated by the state prosecution. It turned out to be quite a speedy process, allocating only 6 days to conduct all witness accounts, carry out hearings of arguments, and announce a verdict.
Orak Sarbapeyev was found guilty on the following charges: preparing a crime and an attempt to commit a crime, as well as accepting a large bribe. The ex-head of Zhanaozian city administration was tried by the jury consisting of 12 people. Previously, the jury in Aktau acquitted the former official. However, the case was passed for reconsideration, but already in a different region. The formal reason for that is that Sarbapeyev had become a well-known figure after Zhanaozian tragedy, and it is preferred that the trial be held as further as possible from Mangistau region. However, the tragedy in Zhanaozian is also on the agenda in Aktau. Currently, the opposition leaders are on trial in Aktau court for supporting the strike in Zhanaozian and other locations. Sadikov explains that in order to make the verdict look fair, the sentence for the Zhanaozian's official became a harsh demonstration. It is obvious that their goal was to put the mayor of Zhanaozian behind bars. It is closely related to the events in Zhanaozian. It is also related to the trials of Kozlov and other oil workers who are now on the dock. I think the government is trying to show that it is being objective. They charge the oil workers and opposition leaders, and to make it all look objective, they have now passed a harsh sentence on the high official. The media did not follow the second trial over the Zhanaozian head of administration. Aidos Sadikov, however, did not miss a single process. He says that the guilt of the defendant was never proved. The prosecution did not furnish sufficient material evidence. The entire case was built on the testimony of two Sadikov brothers. They claimed that they had given Sarbapev a bribe of $40,000 for his assistance in construction of a 200-apartment residential building. The civil servant was not found guilty on this criminal episode, however. He was adjudged guilty of a preparation and an attempt to commit a crime. The judge is reading the verdict. In accordance with the Article 24, Part 3 and 311, and Part 5, the court hereby finds you guilty and sentences you to 10 years of imprisonment. You will be serving your sentence in a high-security prison. My son is not guilty. There are no facts to prove his crime, but he was still sentenced to 10 years. Is this really justice? There are no facts whatsoever, only the testimony of a drug addict. To recap, the criminal case against Orakh Sarbapev was initiated following the December tragedy in Zhanaozian. The lengthy strike ended in mass riots at the time. According to official figures, 16 people died. More than 100 were wounded. Local officials were made partially responsible. They were accused of corruption and starting a labor conflict. On May 25th, the ex-head of city administration was brought to trial. However, he was acquitted of all charges by the jury. On August 2nd, the Board of Appeals of the Mangistau Regional Court overturned the verdict, and the Supreme Court passed the case to the court in October.
The jury's verdict in October came as a surprise for observers at the Aktau trial over opposition leaders. Many were struck by the judge's speed, while others did not hide their indignation. Civil rights activist Aysel Nurgazieva, who represents victims of Zhanaozian tragedy, says that they believe at least 10 more years should be added to his term for inciting social hatred. Zhanaozian residents are convinced that the ex-mayor is directly to blame for what took place in the oil town. Orakh Sarbapev could not or would not prevent the looming conflict that led to the deaths of innocent people, and he must answer in full for that.
I don't know if Sarbapev's jury-delivered verdict will satisfy victims of December 16 events. The issue at hand is the incitement of social hatred. People don't really care about the amount of money he had stolen. What they really want is to punish people responsible for opening fire on December 16. I thought the sentence would be milder. The first surprise for me was that the court was held in Aktau and not in Aktau. The question of why this trial was relocated still remains open. Whatever crime he committed, he needs to be persecuted in Aktau, as the crimes were committed in Mangistau region. But all of a sudden, he was relocated to Aktau for a retrial, and I think that some internal disputes also play into this. Why was he acquitted of the bloodshed in the city where he was the head of the administration, but then accused of financial crimes? This reminds me of a case with Minister Daskaliyev, who was unexpectedly brought to trial. At the time, the case was also about embezzlement and financial crimes, and it was rumored that it was also caused by internal struggles of the political elite.
Meanwhile, hearings of arguments continue in the trial over opposition politicians. The defense took the floor after the prosecution, and Vladimir Kozlov personally took part in the court debates. Not surprisingly, the entire day was not enough for the leader of the opposition party, since he is the main defendant accused of inciting social hatred, calling for the overthrow of constitutional order, and organizing a criminal group. The prosecution asked for 9 years in prison. An experienced PR manager, as he was called numerous times by the prosecution, Vladimir Kozlov began the hearings with the following, quote, "The criminal case is fabricated on 2 types of lies, large and very large," end quote.
Kozlov spoke in more details about charges pressed against him and his associates, citing the example of advertising affecting people's mind. A man acquires only 16% of information consciously, and the rest of 84% is picked up on an unconscious level. In fact, that's how videos with mournful music and red-tinted backgrounds were edited and presented by prosecution during the debates. Kozlov noted that in a country ruled almost exclusively by a certain group of people, the investigation becomes synonymous with prosecution, freely assumed. Some of the investigators' functions and applying extrinsic concepts. By presenting the video, the prosecutors practically attempted to get into people's subliminal consciousness and this way exonerate the responsibility from those involved in the tragic events on December 16, said Kozlov. The defendant added that everyone knows the names of people responsible for Zhanaozian riots, but the guilty do not want to accept liability for what they have done. In addition, Kozlov pointed to prosecutors saying that people really responsible for the tragedy wear the same kind of shoulder straps. On several occasions, Judge Mirzabekov unsuccessfully tried to hold back the politician from crossing the line in emotional outbursts. Perhaps the judge realized that prosecutor Zhanaev also went overboard during his Tuesday speech, peppered by quotes from classical literature and proverbs.
Өзімше қылмыскер деп білмеймін.
I cannot call them criminals. On the contrary, these people have been very helpful to the strikers. Allegedly, they used the strikes for their own benefit by purposefully politicizing the situation. I do not know who would want to do this, but one thing is clear. Not a single witness claimed that these people are to blame for what happened. On the top of that, they help others financially. After all, the money is always an issue. For instance, the trip to the European Parliament in Almaty requires money. These people gave others funds and tickets when possible, while perhaps being in need themselves or even borrowing money to do so. That truly makes me respect them.
The pros and cons of a national referendum were discussed on Tuesday in Almaty by politicians and experts. The majority were in favor of holding the people's vote, but there were opinions against it. The next coverage weighs both sides of the issue from the forum.
Almost 30 experts, representatives of civil society and the opposition gathered at an Almaty roundtable on Tuesday to voice their opinions about the possible referendum and whether it should include questions about Eurasian and customs unions. The discussions were moderated by Social Democrat Bulat Abilov, who clearly identified his position. Kazakhstan is looking at a perspective of being dragged into the supranational political structure called Eurasian Union and losing the history of its political independence. At the same time, Kazakhs are totally removed not only from the decision-making process, but even from getting any clear information. Political scientist Aidos Sarim is also ready to vote at the referendum. He reasons that Kazakhstan is an independent state and the imposed integration with Russia and Belarus threatens its sovereignty on the political and economic levels. The Customs Union, the Collective Security Treaty Organization, and the Eurasian integration are just the echo of the Soviet Union collapse, and perhaps it is better if all parties just walk away from these unions peacefully. Economist Mukhtar Tayjan even suggests that Kazakhstan should exit from both the customs union and the integrated economic space. He also says that the issue of returning strategic industrial facilities into state ownership should be well thought out before including it in the list of referendum questions. If we include this issue, we have to clarify the conditions first. I see a tendency now of selling the shares of Kazmys, whose owners are ready to sell them at market prices, since these industrial objects now cost billions. And based on the results of the proposed referendum, they can say, yes, we are ready to give the shares back to the state, but at current market prices. Member of Alga Party Mikhail Sizov recalls that it will not be easy to hold a referendum in Kazakhstan. Back in 2003, his party already suggested to raise the issue of land ownership, and then in 2010 attempted to call a referendum on the early presidential elections, an abdication of the acting head of state. Right now we have a civil initiative to hold this referendum. This is not the Alga or Azad party's initiative, and it came from the population, supported by many representatives of the civil society. But whether the authorities will allow us to hold it or not is a big question. The politicians' and public figures' spirit does not seem to inspire the head of the Association of Entrepreneurs. Viktor Yambayev feels that it is premature to call a referendum. Democrats have to deal with their internal problems first, and only then stir the public opinion. This is not important right now, as nothing bad is to happen. Entrepreneurs will continue to bring goods from Russia, just as they did before the customs union. Extortion at the borders are the same, and the same corrupt customs officers and financial police are in place. As long as it does not get worse, let things remain as they are. That is why I think the referendum is not needed. We ourselves are not ready for it, and we have not prepared the public for it. At the end of the discussion, the participants came up with a resolution, although it was not accepted unanimously. The working group preparing at the referendum will now discuss all the arguments and allow experts to discuss the matter in Almaty and Astana later in October.
A somewhat of a new government is formed in Kazakhstan. The president signed the decree on Tuesday, and as expected, the cabinet of ministers did not undergo severe changes. Most of the ministers of Karim Asimov's team managed to stay on board. Instead of the newly appointed Prime Minister Serik Akhmetov, the chair of Deputy Prime Minister is assumed by Aset Isikeshov, who occupied the post in the past.
The only surprise was the return of Yerbolat Dasayev to the political arena after his appointment as Minister of Economic Development and Trade instead of Bakharjan Sagintayev, who became the first deputy chairman of the ruling party Nur Otan. Dasayev has previously headed the financial ministry of Kazakhstan, and according to some sources, his personal fortune is estimated at $102 million. The official owns a quarter of Lancaster Group, one of the largest cosmetic producers in the world, as well as a substantial stake at Kazinvest Bank. Dasayev's appointment as a health minister in 2004 caused serious debates, and experts doubted that a financier could perform well as a physician-in-chief. Even more headlines made his subsequent resignation due to mass infection of newborns with HIV in southern Kazakhstan region. This, however, was not the only incident during Dosayev's reign at the helm. Another scandal involving BCG vaccines also caused a significant public resonance. A few chairs in the cabinet remain empty for now, as the fate of two members of the previous government is not yet known. The head of the Foreign Policy Office, Yerzhan Kazakhanov, and the Minister of Labor and Social Protection, Gulshara Abdukalikova, are absent from the national leader's decree.
The reshuffles in government are expected in a minor, contends political expert Dosim Satbayev. The institutions will continue on their intended course, and nothing sensational should be expected. However, Satbayev says high-ranking officials would do well to heed to criticism addressed towards previous officials.
There are just a few ministers who at least understand what they do and have an appropriate professional background. Manbayev, Kilimbetov, and Jamyshev are among those who have at least certain good skills and knowledge they gained working in their ministries. The rest of our ministers are more interested in their own political agendas and absolutely do not understand the issues which their ministers should actively work on resolving. Right now, there is a lot of criticism about the work of many ministries, including ministries of agriculture and education.
Former Almaty Mayor Viktor Khrapunov's wife's official website appeared on the internet. In it, Leila speaks about her experience being one of the first victims of Nazarbayev's war against independent media.
The grey and white pages tell the story of a businesswoman, Leila Khrapunova, who has lost a successful business because of the president's family. The site chronicles her struggles from the initiation of successful businesses in several fields to eventually losing it all. Most posts reach a conclusion that the country is overwhelmed with corruption, while the president's family owns all of the resources. The site also has a section about political persecution, where Khrapunova describes her television career. This is where it was particularly noticeable how Nazarbayev's regime and the influence of his family have been gradually gaining power. The concept of public television was perverted after Dariga Nazarbayeva decided to get involved in Kazakhstan's mass media. Right now, television is just a vehicle to exclusively promote ideas of Nazarbayev's family. I kept my independence and returned to my own TV channel TAN. Headline-making murders, as well as disappearances of independent journalists and opposition activists were a norm at the time, but I removed all politics from the air. Despite this, they didn't let me work. Pressured by Nazarbayev's, advertisers pulled their contracts and I was forced to sell TAN. According to international media experts, right now the president's family controls 99% of Kazakh mass media.
Almaty Regional Department of Internal Affairs is searching for two suspects in the Ilya-Alatau National Park mass murder. According to Kazakh, they are resident of West Kazakhstan region Sayan Khairov and resident of Jambul region Zaurbek Batabayev. Both of them are members of a radical Islamic movement.
The information slip signed by the Deputy Chief of the Regional Department of Internal Affairs, Berik Kozhamberdiyev, has been distributed across all local police stations. Security officials say that criminals may be armed and are likely planning terrorist attacks against the police, using fake officers' uniforms to break into the city headquarters of Internal Affairs Department. Previously, gamekeeper Alexei Shkilov was arrested following the massacre in the Ilya-Alatau National Park on August 13th, which left 12 people dead. Shkilov is currently charged only with illegal possession of a firearm, while his lawyer Yermorat Mukanov says the suspects may be somehow related to a criminal group terminated during the special operation in Tausamal village.
In other news, leaders of public organizations, journalists, and politicians are demanding to abolish the cumulative pension system and the idea to raise the retirement age for women. Activists claim that the reform, which is being developed by the head of the National Bank, Grigory Marchenko, might lead to the worsening of social conditions for women and children, and insist that the state make the decision while considering the opinion of Kazakhstan residents.
The Chilean model of the pension system in Kazakhstan is expected to have dramatic development. Union leaders of the Generation Movement and the opposition believe that it is not accidental that the authorities have come up with the idea to raise the retirement age for women now. The participants of Tuesday's roundtable in Almaty were convinced that this is an attempt to hide real economic problems. They also have many complaints about the current pension system and say that the return on investments of all pension funds was just 30% in the last 5 years, while the inflation rate has exceeded 60%. Thus, panelists concluded the price increase depreciated the deductions to the pension fund of all Kazakhstan citizens. First of all, one cannot expect to have a decent life with these savings. Secondly, only people with formal jobs could accumulate these savings. Thus, besides civil servants and employees of large companies, all others are left on the side of this pension system. The management of the state pension fund has a totally different mood. On Tuesday, the organization reported on the results of its work, and it appears the amount of pension savings reached $18 billion in 2011. The fund also contemplated raising the retirement age for women and came up with its own reasoning. The population is getting older, and it is necessary to safeguard the financial system of the state. The reason why we look into the issue of raising the retirement age is first of all related with the need to accumulate additional funds for people's pension savings accounts. Besides, the demography of our population is also changing. MP Nurlan Jazulbekov seems to have no objections to raising the retirement age for women in Kazakhstan. He suggests that since women who are engaged in their own business do not think about savings and deductions to pension funds, the state should not be responsible for their retirement payments either. You are well aware of the number of people who are self-employed, work without regard to the labor code, and allocate no payments neither to the state social fund nor towards their pension savings. In the meantime, the number of self-employed people is increasing every year, which creates a burden for the state budget. This is not the way it should be. The new leader of Adilet party, Tuligen Sudikov, does not share the opinion of the ruling party member. He believes that premature statements of officials and MPs could lead to social tension, especially when they follow the example of developed states. Mr. Marchenko should know that this has nothing to do with gender equality. It is absolutely wrong to compare the quality of life in Europe and here. It is nonsense. Any reasonable person would argue against it, and people already oppose it now. The critics of the pension system believe the issue also stems from the management of state economy. According to some data, Kazakhstan sold $500 billion worth of raw material since 2000. Pyotr Svoik emphasizes that while allowing Western companies to make profit in Kazakhstan, the government forgets about its own citizens. The participants of the roundtable promised to continuously fight for the current norms regarding the present retirement age for women.
Moving on to academic news, Kazakh teachers are dissatisfied with Kazakh history textbooks. This was voiced on Tuesday at the session of the work group evaluating and analyzing educational literature.
Most complaints were caused due to textbooks written by different authors who cite different dates and interpretations for the same historical events. The books also don't correspond with the answers for the United National Testing, which explains why many college students fail to prepare for the exams properly. In addition, members of the working group suggested that the role of the nation's leader Nursultan Nazarbayev in shaping the nationhood should be better emphasized to better instill patriotism among the youth. Colleges and lyceums prepared the students using textbooks for grades 10 and 11, but questions for national testing exist only up to the 9th grade. Subjects there didn't match at all, and it is only logical that students could not give correct answers.
High school graduates from rural areas now have a chance to study in Kazakhstan University, but the foundation provided 189 educational scholarships to orphans and children from poor families from different regions of the country.
The contest was launched this February with around 2,000 applications submitted for participation. The main condition for winning the grant is good school performance and a readiness to become a foundation volunteer. In total, the organization spent around $3 million for educational grants program. It goes without saying that the main issue in terms of technical education is providing accommodation to students. Most of you are aware of how important this is. We want to see more dormitories built, specifically in rural areas. We also want to have more access to rural youth and make technical and vocational education more accessible to them.
And in final news of the day, the historical part of the puppet theater will not be demolished. This was announced by the Almaty Culture Department. Only the sections built in the 30s and the 50s that were in a state of emergency are set for demolition.
The Almaty Department of Culture learned about the current state of the building by chance when an additional stage was planned to be added to the construction in 2011, and it was revealed the foundation was almost gone. The nearly 60-year-old building had to be urgently demolished since the foundation was ultimately ruined after an accident in the water network. To avoid the repeat of the situation in the future, it was decided to inspect the rest of the historical sites of the city.
С тех пор, как мы выяснили, что некоторые здания находятся в таком аварийном состоянии.
Ever since we found out about the current poor condition of the building, we made provisions in the next year's budget to inspect the seismic resistance of all buildings to avoid similar incidents in the future.
Во избежание вот таких подобных ситуаций.
This is all we have time for now. Thank you for watching and see you tomorrow.